Start the recording again. I'm so excited to have you all back again. I see some familiar faces, I see some new faces, but we're really excited. This is the fourth installment, I believe, in our virtual celebration of Juneteenth for the Orange County African American Historical Society. And we're really excited to continue our theme of the month-long celebration, a homecoming celebration, with tonight's performances and discussion about Juneteenth. We dubbed it the soundtrack of homecoming, and we're going to have an amazing set of performances from our two panelists, and then followed by a discussion about the power and the importance of music. So I'm really excited to welcome our panelists, and we're going to, for those of you who have been on these programs before, we're going to do it slightly different than we have been because we have musicians with us. So we're going to let the performances go first, then we're going to move into our panel discussion, and of course at the end we're going to open up the format for questions from the audience, and you can feel free to ask those questions in the chat. And you can also raise your virtual hand and I can unmute you to ask those questions. So to get us started, I'd like to introduce our first panelist, and then we're going to watch a video of one of his performances. And then we're going to introduce our second panelist and watch a video of her performance as well. So our first panelist tonight is Horace Scruggs. Horace is a professional musician, composer, and choral conductor. He holds a master's degree in music education with a concentration in choral conducting from Shenandoah Conservatory in Winchester, Virginia. After 35 years, he recently retired from teaching choral music, piano, guitar, and music technology for Madison, Louisa, and Fluvanna counties. He also conducted the Fluvanna County Community Chorus for 13 years. Horace has also been part of the music faculty at Piedmont Virginia Community College, where he taught piano, jazz history, music appreciation, and conducted the PVCC chorus. Horace continues to lecture and produce documentaries on the subjects of African American history and culture. And he's also an avid landscape photographer and currently resides in Fluvanna County with his wife, Teresa. And for those of you longtime OCAHS Juneteenth attendees, he and his group Odyssey of Soul have often performed at our live celebrations. And last year, he also did one of our virtual programs where he showcased an amazing documentary he made. So I am going to now pull up his video and share screen. So if you give me just a second to get it all going. There we go. And we'll include it. All right. And let's play. Are you all, were you all able to see that when it was going?
I think you got a little, it has a little lead time.
Right, but you could see it?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
We'll go right back to it then. Let's see. Apologies, I just wanted to make sure because I couldn't tell if folks could see it. And we'll go back. Here we go.
It sounds hard to hear.
Yeah, you have to share sound.
Oh, can you not hear?
It's very hard to hear.
Yeah, it's very hard to hear.
Mm. I love that. I love the silent cheers. That's amazing. Thank you so much for that. And there is a lot of great comments in the chat. So without further ado, I'm gonna move to our next performance. And in her performance video, she gives a little bit of an introduction to herself, but I'm gonna do a quick one. Dr. Dena Jennings is a luthier, musician, writer, Virginia master naturalist, and an internal medicine physician with a style of medical practice that harkens back to the days of a small town doctor and house calls. For over 20 years, she's maintained practices in Ohio and Virginia. And she's also has started along with her husband, beginning in 2018, the Appalachian on-time music gathering, The Thing, on her farm, which is a 4-day rustic retreat for Black string band musicians, educators, archivists, and allies that culminates in a community concert and gospel singing. She's also a champion for the human rights and is the executive director of Imani Works, which is a human rights advocacy group. Basically, there is nothing that Dena doesn't do and doesn't do well. And so we are incredibly lucky to have her part of our local community and part of our panel tonight. So I'm going to pull up her performance, and remember to share the sound when it gets started, and we should be good to go. Give me just 1 second.
In 1864, my great-great-great-great-grandfather, Samuel Dry, was on his way to freedom, and we are on the way to fulfilling his dreams. My mother, Virginia Ross Williams, my father, Alvin Lee Sims, made sure that I know where I am going. Samuel Dry escaped slavery in the Cumberland Gap of Kentucky. He ran 100 miles to enlist at Camp Nelson, just south of Lexington. He and 1,400 other Kentucky men found their freedom.
Dena, what are we looking for here?
We're looking for my great-great-great-great-grandfather, Samuel Dry, fought in the Civil War, or was enlisted on the Union side. What am I looking for? Dry. Anderson. There he is. Samuel Dry, without the E.
Which regiment is this?
This is the 123rd Regiment, United States Colored Infantry. And there he is. Hey, Grandpappy.
Oh,
That's me. Your name? Camp Nelson was a massive supply station for the Union Army during the Civil War. I spent 2 days there and recorded this log. So, I'm Dena Ross Jennings. It's 29 degrees, and I am in just south of Lexington, Kentucky, at Camp Nelson, which is the Union camp where my great 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 grandfather Samuel Dry escaped and ran to get his freedom from slavery. He came with a big wave of black men across Kentucky who were allowed to enlist in exchange for their freedom. And so I've been wanting to come here. There's a song that I play called Camp Nelson Blues, which was written by two young men by the name of Booker who were actually born here. So much history here, and it's actually kind of emotional for me right now. It's very, very cold. It's 29 degrees, and I took a chance on coming here because I'm going to be playing a festival in Lexington, which I'm really excited to play. I'll actually play Camp Nelson at the festival, and it's pretty amazing. It's a beautiful place. I hope it was this beautiful when Grandpa Samuel came here, because it would have been a relief to just land on this base and be able to be here and have his freedom. So I'm pretty excited about that. What I really wanted to do was come here, sit on the porch, and play the song. But it's so cold. It's even cold for me, and I love snow and I love the cold. But it's pretty cold. So. Thanks for listening. Thanks for coming with me on this journey, because it's pretty cool. Pretty cool. There's more history, and I'll have because Kentucky was not considered a rebel state. The families of the men who came, the families that came with them, they were not considered contraband as part of the war, the Civil War. So since they were not contraband, there were not funds to help the women and children that came with the men, which was really unfortunate because it turned into quite a disaster here. The women and children had made camps all around, and where they made camps, when the U.S. Army finally said, we can't do this anymore, they kicked all the women and children out into the woods and burned their little villages, the little shanty towns that they had made, and some of them died. Then there was a huge outcry from the community, which is why it's important to be an activist. There was a real outcry from the community and said this isn't right, and so they actually brought the women and children back and built barracks for them to stay in. Kind of rambling because, like I said, this is kind of exciting and kind of emotional right now for me to sit here when my great grandpappy Samuel came for his freedom. It's amazing.
Oh, dancing all around.
Dancing all around.
Oh, Mo just got here in town.
Oh, Mo just got here in town.
Hey Mo, how was the ride?
Hey Mo, how's your ride?
Mo Sadie's came to ride.
Mo Sadie came to ride.
I say 1, 2, 3, yeah. 1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3.
Oh, dance like me.
Dance like me.
Dancing all night long.
call the pebble dead, and we will talk about walking. There shall be caring, and when we both have had enough, I will take him from my shoe, singing, "Leave your Europe." Then I'll take your hand, finally glad that you are here by my side, 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 if you are here by my side, by my side. In 2018, my husband and I started a music festival on our farm to celebrate my family's commitment to Appalachian music.
Unfortunately, most folks are on mute, but there's amazing response in the chat. So my first question to you all is, I was struck by two things watching these videos. One is how they really reflected the wide variety of African-American music. And two, it got me wondering is, why did you pick the pieces you picked to present today? So I'm gonna go to you first, Dena, because it was your idea to include recorded performances in this discussion.
Well, I guess my thought is if a picture is worth 1,000 words, I have no idea what music is. Music is then priceless because so I thought it was important if we at least represented ourselves with the music that we play. And I was so glad to hear Horace's music. I always enjoy listening to him. And the music that I chose, that first piece that you heard while I was narrating the story of my grandfather is actually a piece that I wrote after I heard the story of Paul Jennings going every Sunday. Paul Jennings, the manservant of geez, Montpelier, James Madison. Though he could never live with his wife while they were in slavery, he would walk every Sunday to her farm and be with her and the family. So I wrote that piece because of him being on his way, and I could just imagine him, the closer he got to Mayfield to get to where she was or Fanny was, that his step would just get faster and faster and faster. And I'd never written a jig before. So I said, well, let's write a jig and let it be about that. Let it be about being on your way and being excited about arriving. And if that, with that, I felt like that's what I wanted to represent. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Real Orange County connections.
Yeah.
Horace, what about you?
I chose the piece because of the 6/8 African drumming that is the kind of the bed of the whole piece, kind of the mantra or the ostinato throughout it. So I was inspired by, djembe, kind of those South West African rhythms in 6/8 that kind of roll along. And then, of course, layered on top of that, kind of a orchestral smooth jazz kind of sound. So for me, it was just kind of an expression of recognizing those African traditions and then laying on top of it the kind of the jazz traditions as well. So it kind of spans a great deal of music throughout it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So kind of picking up on this, Dena, you mentioned that the story of Paul Jennings inspired you to write that piece. How do you think music can help us better understand the past or even connect the past to the present?
It's important to hear what people were creating in the past, and that certainly informs us today. I don't have the details. I wish I did, but someone found the notation of music that was being played on a plantation in the Caribbean. A gentleman who heard the music and was so inspired by it, he actually sat and wrote what he was hearing. And so we have that music because of notation. We're able to hear what those enslaved Africans, enslaved Caribbean people were playing. And that just thrills me. That is so thrilling to know we can actually hear. We don't have a recording of it, but not a sound recording of it, but we have the written music. And Rhiannon Giddens, I don't know if you're familiar with her. She is the woman who was in the Carolina Chocolate Drops. She has done an album of those songs, and they're just they're jaw dropping when you hear it. So, and then that informs us. So as we writers like Horace and myself are hearing music like that, or we're hearing those people who came before us, even though now that we do not have sound recordings that we can hear, it inspires us as we write our music and then take that same music and keep it moving towards the future.
Excellent, thank you. What about you, Horace? How do you think music helps us understand the past or make connections between the past and the present?
I think as in any culture, music is always a binding force, if you will. It's something that transcends time. I think of the theme is the homecoming, the soundtrack of homecoming, and I think for for many people, but I think for African Americans, a lot of time home was always changing. Home was more where people were, not necessarily where, because you couldn't own land, and because you were owned, then home could change all of a sudden. So I think home was more where people were rather than where land or houses were, and where people were, there was music being created. And so I think a lot of times when we hear, again, those African rhythms or, Appalachian music or spirituals and the gamut of African American music as it moved from the South to the North, it always created a new place of home, a new kind of place where we can connect to. And even though those places weren't stable and weren't concrete, that was music that would always bring us back to it. And really the music was that home place. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. I love that you tied it back to this theme, because one of the things that when we had met and talked about was the connection between that idea of coming home or homecoming and how that's intertwined by discussions over ownership of African American music and how in popular perception or misperception is that African American music is limited to specific genres. And it really, one of the things that we had talked about is that it expands beyond that, and it's so much more diverse. And I think just in your 2 performances, and if we had 6 more panelists, we could cover 6 more genres and types and topics. But how do you think, how have African Americans shaped, American music, or how has American music been created out of these influences? So Horace, I'm going to go to you first, then I'm going to go to Dena.
Sure. I think they're one and the same. When we talk about American music, you are in a large way talking about African American music. Every genre of music that we call American has been touched by African Americans. And I think part of that reason is that we were here at the beginning. Before our country was founded, African Americans were very much a part of its culture, its burgeoning culture, its economy. A lot of the things that we call American are influenced by African Americans. And so I think they're one and the same. I think the play of racism and commercialism kind of divides those things into different genres, and you have to have a certain face to play that kind of music. That kind of music is for people of a certain skin color. Whereas the more we dig in and the more the story is told, we understand that African Americans were part of every genre of music. And so I think that's the biggest takeaway, that it's just one and the same. Yeah.
Absolutely. Dena, do you want to add to? I see you nodding.
Yeah, I 100% agree with what Horace is saying. And it would be interesting to me if we had a time machine and we could go back and stop the Jim Crow era entirely. Just stop that whole idea of separate but equal. What music would look like today? Because I know that in the old time music community and the bluegrass music community, Jim Crow laws hugely shaped what happened there. You were not allowed to join a competition, and there's a lot of healthy competition in the old time music and bluegrass music scene. You show up to a festival, you have like a fiddle off or a banjo off, and people play, and whoever's decided to be the best, that's the one that gets most of the contracts for the next year. But you had to declare your race on those cards when you signed up to compete. And if you were not white American, you were not allowed to compete. And so the best was chosen from a single group of people. What would that have looked like if people like Louis Bluey had been able to play fiddle in some of those competitions and come to the forefront, and then how many children he might have influenced to then become players as well. So I'm kind of getting lost and rambly, but I think that the impact of Black culture on American music is inescapable. You can't separate it out. You can't erase it. It's there, even with the shackles of things like the Jim Crow era.
Excellent, thank you. And I love that question of thinking about how it would look different.
Yeah.
Horace, you look like you want to jump in.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I mean, even when you think of minstrelsy and blackface,
Mhm.
as white Americans were trying to imitate African Americans in their music, then those white Americans, well, what do they have to do? That they have to learn how to play in a African American style to be convincing. And so that's how African American music seeped into what we would call traditionally white American music. And so, but the narrative is that that music was created by white Americans when it was simply a stealing of culture, if you will, to be more convincing and to be more commercial, viable as a minstrel.
Yeah. And that wasn't just, Horace is right, that wasn't just a blip of time in
Yeah.
antebellum South. Minstrelsy, blackface minstrelsy was the first popular music genre. It was the longest lasting music genre, not only across the United States, but around the world. There was a show called the Black and White Minstrel Show, I think that's the name of it, in the UK that ran until the late 70s, where the men were all in blackface, the women were in antebellum costumes, and it ran that long, no kidding, like to mid 70s, can you believe it? You know, and people were enraged when it went off the air. But so it's there's that kind of impact that a people and their culture can have on music, on art, on dance, on so many things. It's there and it's palpable.
Absolutely. What would you all say? So we've kind of talked about broad speaking influence on American music across the country and now across the world. But what do you think is the music of this region? What's the sound of Central Virginia? What does this area sound like to you? I'm looking at you, Dena, because you're big on my screen. So
Right at.
Well, for me, it's the sound of string band. It's the sound of Piedmont blues. John Jackson from the neighboring county was a NEA fellow for his Piedmont blues music, and people all around the world recognize him as a leader in Piedmont blues. So that specific blues style, you'd hear other players playing that same style, but to me that's the sound, the string band sound, that Appalachian black string band sound is what this sound is for this region.
what about you, Horace? What does this region sound like to you?
Well, for me, as a preacher's kid, we were allowed to play the blues. I'm just kidding. But yeah, and I think I was heavily influenced by the African American church. I mean, that's no doubt there. I come from a large family of singers, so we sang this, because my sisters are a good deal older than I am. We sang spirituals a great deal, and that's kind of where my harmonies, when I'm writing music, I'm always hearing those kind of pentatonic harmonies with the flat third and seventh to give it that kind of blues feeling. But for me, it's all in the vocal style of the African American and usually Baptist church singing that really kind of resonates with me. But yeah.
So I'm going to ask 2 follow-up questions. What makes that vocal style different for you? I'm going to ask you that, Horace. And Dena, what makes the Piedmont blues different from the Mississippi blues?
Mm.
I'm not sure if there's a difference in sound. Um, I think historically, vocal music was when, well, this kind of goes back to as the Africans were proselytized into Christian beliefs, um, there was something called the lining out of hymns. You know, you would have a person up front and they would sing the first line of a hymn, and then the congregation would kind of echo and it would follow through. And I believe that that was kind of like that first translation or transference of musical. Um, and so you had these European harmonies, but the melodic strength of the West African, again, is that flat third and flat seventh kind of mournful sound. And that's how the spirituals came, came to be. And so I think that singing, and then the banjo, well, the gourd, and Dena, you know more about this than I do, but a lot of those instruments weren't obviously brought with them. And so there was a recreation of those instruments here later on. But I think the initial musical expression was a vocal one, because that's all you had. That's all you could carry. And so when you're working in the field, what instrument do you have with you? You have a voice. And so so for me, I think that's why it's so deeply in our African American culture, that's in a lot of ways, when it comes to gospel singing and blues and any kind of vocal music in the African American vein, that vocal sound is what makes it. When you think of soul music, when you think of Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul, she had a rock band, but her vocal, that gospel styling, was what made it soul. If you took away Aretha's voice, it would be just like a rock band from the 60s and 70s. But because she sang with that vocal styling, it became soul. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, Dena, what makes the Piedmont blues unique?
I am not a blues aficionado, so I don't know the baseline difference between Piedmont and Mississippi Delta blues. I know that there is one, but one of the things about Piedmont blues is that rhythm. There's this undulating rhythm in it, in a stride that goes with it. It's almost like the difference between it and the difference between Piedmont blues and other blues styles is almost the difference between jazz, stride piano, and modern jazz. It's got this rhythm that goes behind it, and at the same time there's this melody that's riding over the chords that are being played. So you really have to be talented to do that. I don't play Mississippi, I don't play Delta or Piedmont style blues, but you've got to be able to keep that rhythm going, and you've got to be able to play the melody over those chords that you're rolling out at the same time. And it's just a full-on sound of music when you hear somebody play Piedmont blues.
Amazing. Thank you. So one of the things I also wanted to kind of tie back to is we've organized these discussions and these virtual performances as part of our Juneteenth celebration. And now that Juneteenth is in its second year of being a national holiday, it's something that's gone beyond Galveston, that's stretched across the country. In Orange County African American Historical Society has been celebrating Juneteenth since 2006. But what do you think we should be listening to on Juneteenth? How should we be celebrating with music, or what should the soundtrack of Juneteenth be for you? Horace, you look like you got an idea.
No. Formulating. Well, I think I think what would be, just as African Americans and the overarching Americans we have kind of rediscovered this holiday, or this moment in history. I think it's a great opportunity to find the untold stories of African American history, and part of that is the music. Um, you know, when we're talking about the banjo and blues, those are styles of music that are not in a lot of modern African American communities. Those are styles of music that aren't necessarily embraced very much. Especially we know the when the banjo became part of minstrelsy, a lot of African Americans began to reject those folk songs and those that style of music, that kind of Southern folk music, just to get away from the minstrelsy moniker and the way it was presented. African Americans were presented. And part of that was also that the Great Migration was happening at the same time. So we were separating ourselves from anything that sounded down home and Southern. We wanted to be, entrepreneurs in the North, we wanted to try to move to places where we could find jobs and drive cars and those sorts of things. So I think it's a great opportunity as we are rediscovering Juneteenth, that we are just rediscovering our roots in those sense of musical styles that we have overlooked. I think jazz is included in that. There are many different styles, rediscovering the spirituals. I think it's a great time of rediscovery and to re-narrate the history, because it's been narrated for us for so many years. I think it's a great time to kind of say, no, this is the story that we would like to be told.
Yeah, I think that the music should be, the soundtrack of Juneteenth should be as vast and varied as Black American culture. All of it, and all at the same time. Just play all of it. And we're still discovering one another, let alone one people group discovering another people group. Black Americans are still discovering one another. And there's some really neat mashups going on around I don't know how familiar any of you are with Gangsta Grass. Those guys are amazing. It's, they're friends of mine. They're bluegrass and old time mixed with hip hop and rap. And they're killing it. They're touring in Europe right now. And just, who would think of putting that together? Just the other day, my husband and I were driving, and he said he wanted to listen to some Motown, so we put some Motown on. And I said, wouldn't it be cool if you had like banjo tracks riding over Motown music? That would be really, really cool. So anybody who wants to take that, run with it. I think that would just be neat. We should be playing all of it all the time, and not just Juneteenth.
That sounds great. One of the things that I think is really interesting, and I think for some of our audience members that have been following this series through, is how you both responded reminded me so much of the conversation I had last week with our panelists about food, in the same way of people trying to create separation, so leaving those Southern foodways behind, and trying to separate from a painful past and painful history. And then creating this huge variety that we have in music, but in this huge variety that we have in food, because what people eat in Los Angeles is different than what people eat in South Carolina, which is different than what people eat in, all over, the country. And it's amazing to see these different parts of the culture, following these same journeys. And so we can eat all of the food and listen to all of the music next year. And I think that would sound like a great celebration, or a really great place to start. So one of the other things that I wanted to ask you about is, you all have mentioned some really amazing musicians and artists. And I just kind of want to dive into that a little bit of, if someone wanted to learn more about African-American music, who should they go to? Because who are the people or the institutions that are caring for and continuing these special kinds of music that you all have been talking about? So I'm going to go to you, Dena, first.
Thank you.
My journey of discovering Black American music has been through the Library of Congress. There are just reels and reels and reels of music there to hear primary source folks playing the music that others have taken and done their version of, but to hear all that music from primary sources is amazing. So you know, there are quite a few books as well. Dena Epstein's gosh, I'm forgetting the name of the song of the book right now, but it covered a lot of the music, a lot of the banjo music that was discovered belonging to Black communities. There are a host of sources out there, but Library of Congress is a great place to start.
Excellent. And I think that's great because so many people don't think of libraries as having music, and they have tons. Horace, your turn.
I think of one recording that comes to my mind, which is Big Mama Thornton's "You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog." And of course we know that Elvis, you know, made it famous, so to speak. But I think her recording, it's kind of at a time, and I wouldn't know exactly when she made that recording, but I'm guessing late 40s, early 50s. When a lot of genres and popular genres weren't well defined. You know, rock and roll wasn't really well defined. Jazz was kind of seeping into some styles of music. The blues was still considered kind of the default form of a lot of, and if you listen to a lot of early rock and roll music, you know, it's a blues base. It's just a blues format. Chuck Berry, those guys, they just played the blues. But there was varying degrees of other styles layered on top of it. So when Big Mama sings Hound Dog, like the drummer is playing this kind of Latin beat on top of it. There's a blues electric guitar. The bass player is kind of walking, but at the same time, kind of pushing the rhythm along. And then of course, on top of that, you have this gospel stylings on top of all of that mixture. And I think that recording shares to me in that time period, just shows all the different styles that are coming together to create American music. And if we look back at any popular styles, from bluegrass to hip hop, you know, if we just go back and look, we understand that African Americans were very much at the center and forefront of all of lots of different styles, from Chuck Berry creating rock and roll, to Jimi Hendrix creating heavy metal and modern rock. You know, of course, all the hip hop canon, you know, and we know that jazz is an African American form as well. So it's kind of, you know, I think it's just kind of getting back to the roots of some of those pioneering musicians, and listening to those people.
So my next question was going to be, oh, go ahead, Dena.
I say something real quick. I would love to sit and pick Horace's brain on Fats Waller, because of everything that I hit a Fats Waller obsession a little while ago, and I'm not quite out of it yet. And I'm just listening to his music over and over, and you hear so many styles that just springboard off of his music. Everything from Broadway to Tin Pan Alley to jazz to modern pop and all the, So right now, Fats Waller is high on my list.
Well, you both just read my mind, because I was going to ask you who's an artist that is inspiring you or meaningful to you, and you both just gave me the answer before I could ask the question. I did look up when Big Mama's Hound Dog recording was made, and it was 1952.
52,
So
okay, cool,
it's on YouTube if anybody hasn't.
It's cool.
Listen.
The one, she's wearing a plaid shirt, which is kind of like got a part of that kind of country blues vibe, you know. and a hat, I think.
Mhm.
I was another person I've just recently started to listen to again is a man by the name of Gil Scott Heron.
Mm,
And so he's kind of like that Curtis Mayfield, Sly and the Family Stone kind of funk R&B, but he always had a social conscious wording. You know, he did something called the H2O Gate Blues, obviously the Watergate Blues. And it's masterful the way he just tells that entire kind of story of, um, you know, the political system being corrupt.
mhm,
And so I've been listening to him a little bit lately. And again, he's not, you know, kind of the smooth, well commercialized versions of R&B, 70s R&B. So he's much more blues based and just a little bit more raw
mhm.
in his way of performing. Yep.
He always reminded, well, Lauryn Hill's work always reminded me of
Okay.
this
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
of the poetry, the melodies, the rhythms, the juxtaposition of words that they play with throughout their work. Yeah.
It's good.
Well, one thing that just struck me is something that the two of you have in common with both those artists is that you're all storytellers.
Mm.
And one thing that people have seen from you today, Dena, but they may not realize about you, Horace, is that you're making documentaries. I mean, the video we watched today of yours, Dena, was a documentary. Horace, you've made documentaries. You're working on another one right now. Is that
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So I wanted to know if either of you could talk a little bit about that relation between maybe making documentary film and music and storytelling. Like, because it seems that you're going in so many amazing but related directions, and I love it. So, Dena, do you have any thoughts on that connection with storytelling and filmmaking?
Um, it's a big part of who we are as a culture. Um, Especially, my roots are Appalachian, and storytelling is what you did. I just came from a family reunion in the mountains in Kentucky, and we are all like um, wonderfully literate and doing our things in our own areas and professions, and yet we were telling stories like we didn't know how to write. you know Detail after detail after detail, and then another one would chime in with their part of the story. It was a little orchestra of all these tales of all the relatives, and it's beautiful. I think storytelling, um, I tried my hand at writing poetry, but I realized what I was writing were really lyrics. So that's when the songwriting really got going. So yeah, we're telling our stories because and then if you link that to music, it just becomes even more powerful and memorable.
Absolutely. What about you, Horace?
I think for me, the documentary side is an outgrowth of COVID. You know? I think we became very, I think video, and even as we're sitting down in this format right now with the Zoom, I think it just I think our brains kind of shifted to that visual aspect. Um, and so for me, that was an outgrowth and actually out of necessity to keep performing. I filmed in the first documentary, I filmed the group Odyssey of Soul performing in a what's termed a slave chapel that's down in our county, Bremo, down in the little town of Bremo. So this chapel was built probably by my ancestors, probably had a hand in it at some point. And so performing in that slave chapel was just kind of like, very special. So I recorded that. But I think the documentaries are mostly, again, about retelling the story and sharing the full story of, African-American culture and history. And so it puts it in a place where, as Dena was speaking, where the stories can be told and retold through a documentary, and people can kind of, different people can hear the story being told by those folks that have lived it or have been told how it was, you know, by their grandparents. So I think for me, that's what the documentaries are doing now, is like really capturing those stories so that now we can say, this is how it was, you know, and these are being told by, you know, firsthand people who experienced it. These are things were, and so the good and bad of them. And so I think the documentaries are really helping just retell and preserve the stories.
Yeah, our Horace said something that reminded me of an incident. Well, something that happened while I was at my family reunion. We have a family church that was built in 1919. And next to that church, there was a house, a little small cabin. And when you looked at the grass, the house is gone, but when you looked at the grass, you could see the parch mark of where the building was. It was like so neat. I could just stand there and remember my aunt and uncle's house there. And as my husband and I were standing there looking at this space, different ones would come up and say, oh yeah, Grandma Carrie lived there at that house, because that's who they remember. And then somebody else will say, yeah, Uncle Clyde and Aunt Marie lived there, and told another story, and then said, yeah, Aunt Frances, she lived there. And they each had, because their ages were so different, they remembered different people living there. And this house just started growing in my mind. It wasn't just this little cabin anymore. By the time they were done with all the different people who lived there over all the time, and you know, this was probably like 120 years worth of time being talked about. By the time they were done, in my head, the place was a castle. It was huge because there was just that much rich history there. So that's what stories do for us, as you know, that's what they do for me.
Excellent. Well, I want to invite the audience, if you have any questions, to feel free to put them in the chat or raise your virtual hand. And while you're thinking of your questions, I have one. One of the things I was struck by listening and watching you both perform, as an archaeologist, I think a lot about place and things. And the one musical instrument we find a whole lot are mouth harps, is the mouth harp. Occasionally we'll find harmonica pieces, but I was looking at the instruments that you make, Dena, and thinking, well, none of that's going to survive in the archaeological record. Well, and Horace talking about what instruments people would have, they'd have their voice, and then struck with the mouth harp. So just a random question, what do you know about mouth harps? Anyone that plays them, how they're used, and just sort of how that fits in, because that is something we find a whole lot of in the archaeological record at Montpelier around the enslaved community.
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting.
It would make sense. You're finding metal mouth harps, right?
Right.
Yeah. So reeds and bones and those sorts of percussion instruments similar to the mouth harp. Mouth harp was a drone, and so you get that dung 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 sound with it. So it was more percussion than it was melodic, and people could often play a mouth harp, sing over it, and then keep playing. The mouth bow was another one, and I bet you don't find any of those, because that was stick and gut. And so you have the same thing where the stick leans against your mouth and you twang it, and it's a drone. They were just a one note drone. I make mouth bows that you can actually tune, so you can tune it and you get that same ding 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 sound, and you can sing over it. Buffy St. Marie, is that her name? She plays a mouth bow with that same styling of keeping the rhythm and the drone and then singing over.
Excellent. Thank you. it has me really thinking about, you know, what instruments would have been available or made and how much we're missing when we rely just on documents or just on artifacts. And that is, it's sort of that full sound and the importance of oral tradition, whether it's through histories or passing down the music from generation to generation, is so important for having a multi-layered full understanding of the past. Because if all you have is the percussion of the mouth harp, you're missing the melody, you're missing all of that other stuff. So it's, I think it's a really nice, almost metaphor for how we understand the past. We have a question from George, so I'm gonna, George, go ahead.
Thanks, Mary. First wanted to say thank you to you both for sharing tonight. I was really struck that you shared instrumental music because so much of our education system focuses when we teach African American, 18th or 19th century music on just the vocal tradition. So it was really important to see the instrumental. But one of the words that struck me in a email that went around about this event was the power of music. And I believe it's very powerful in how it reaches across cultures. You can speak different languages, but you can understand what somebody's saying through their music. But could you talk maybe just a little bit more about what you see as the power of music, specifically as it relates to the evolution of African American music?
Go ahead, Horace.
Sure. I think, again, it's one of those things that can kind of hold things together, so to speak. It's a thread, it's a glue, that it's a commonality that comes from a shared experience. When we think of African American music, we have the beginning. We have the pressure cooker in which that music was born out of, and we understand that it was enslavement. It was being brought to a different country and then being stripped completely of your culture. And because we are humans, we create culture, and having that music and all of that goes with it, the food, the language, the mannerisms, the values, all kind of improvised on another continent. So I think music is just one of those things that it's one of those threads that goes throughout African American culture and history that's just kind of undeniable. And so whether you are playing, front porch banjo music, or, complicated, jazz melodies or anything, something like that, I think we can just recognize, I think all Americans, we can just kind of recognize that has a beginning in African American enslavement.
Thank you, Dena.
Yeah, thanks for your question. I'm thinking about music and power and communication. If I were an alien and I came here from another planet and asked, what is this music thing you're talking about? I don't know that you could adequately describe music without talking about vibration. That it's a vibration in certain frequencies that sound really good together, or that mesh together, or even create a harmonic where they create another sound that's not even being played. How powerful is that? And then if we're made of so much water, 70% or more, that's got to resonate through us as beings, to just have this vibration, this frequency, these frequencies that meet and create a harmonic that's not even being played. If we're not feeling that, we must be dead. That's powerful. So I think that music is that's the power of it, is that it can vibrate and that it can oscillate in a way that we can't even see it. But we can sure feel it. We can surely feel it.
Absolutely. Well, we're almost to the end of our time, but I wanted to give both our panelists an opportunity, if there's any final thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience before we log off.
Mm. I just want to say thanks to the Orange County African American Historical Society. You guys are awesome. and what you do. There's so many chances to get to hear music coming up this summer as things with COVID kind of lift a little bit. You know, we've got the John Jackson Piedmont Blues Festival going on. And then the following week, our thing is going on here at the farm. And I just hope people, I'm sure Horace has a lineup of things he's doing. I hope people will come out and start to listen to the great, rich music that we have in this county.
Absolutely. Horace?
Yeah, I echo those things again. Thank you all for putting this on. Thank you all for the folks that have chimed in and been listening. That's great. Yeah, I think Central Virginia has a lot of opportunities to present music. And again, I think it's one of those things where we have to begin to seek out those lesser known stories so that we get a complete idea of what music is, especially American music.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to thank you both so much for your time, not only being here and talking, but preparing your performances. And I'm going to hold you to being part of Juneteenth next year in some way, whether it's a live outdoor celebration or virtually or all of the above. So I have it on, you both nodded, so that's an official recorded nod. But I'd like to invite everyone, if you know somebody that missed tonight but really wanted to see it, we will be putting the recording up online at ocaahs.org tomorrow. And then next week we have our final program, which is about African Americans in the military. And we have an amazing set of panelists that are going to talk about the USCT, like Dena talked about her four-time great-grandfather, Samuel Dry. We have some amazing experts in also African-American service in the Revolution. So we're really going to talk about military, African-American military history in Central Virginia again. So join us next week, Wednesday, July 6th at 6 p.m. We will be here. And like I said, everything's recorded and online. So share it with your friends. And thank you again, Dena and Horace. This was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.